Hello, doubtsaloud listeners. Yep, I am back, and this time in the show. I hope you enjoyed last month's show where I wasn't able to make it, but Ed and Francis, as ever, did a great job in interviewing our special guest on the third part of the series on miracles. Now we're going to move to another M, and it's all to do with morality. And we're titling this show Morality in the Field. Now, when it comes to theism and morality, it is a massive topic with a lot of depth. And we're just sort of going to start today looking at the issue of morality for human beings generally and how it ties in with theism and God. And so, Ed, take it away.
Well, we're picking up from episode 26 back in March. So that was where we discussed the moral argument as presented in this book we've been launching off from. So we feel we fended that one off, but to me it was interesting to think about morality as it is sort of out in the field. So we have all these high-flown apologetics arguments and philosophy discussions on morality, but actually let's look at it as it operates in societies and see, for those, does they provide a good foundation for a moral argument, or is it a much better fit to naturalism, morality as it can actually operates in human societies? So that's what I thought we'd look at this month. And so let's ask the question, what is morality like in the field?
Well, morality is something that I think we all feel instinctively exists. And when we looked at the moral argument previously, I think that's one of the things that it relies on, that we do have this instinctive feeling that, yes, there are certain things that are definitely immoral. But when one looks at some of the ways that what we instinctively felt at one time was immoral, how that's changed, it becomes clear that it's perhaps not quite that simple. For instance, I think it's right to say there was a time, and probably even within my lifetime, there was a time when almost nobody would have seriously questioned the notion that gay sex was immoral. At its mildest and most tolerant, you might have found that people would feel sorry for gay people and faintly disgusted by them, probably. But certainly there was no concept, or there was very little concept, that a gay relationship could be in every way equal to a straight relationship. And so that's an absolute sea change. And so it is one of the issues that you have to deal with, about where does that knee-jerk reaction come from? And can it tell us anything about morality and where we get morality from?
I suppose.
Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, Francis, you can say also bring up things that you were bringing up, something that was once sort of bad and immoral and is now kind of okay. As a movement across the world. And then you've got the other side, like even now we're moving into sort of like veganism, vegetarianism, and some people at one end are moving into the realm of almost morality there. So what once was okay and no one turned a blind eye, suddenly it's like a new consciousness is coming in, rightly or wrongly. It was noting the subject matter.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's what once was okay is now like being questioned quite seriously, and then once, as you just said, what once wasn't okay is now kind of okay.
Well, what I'd like to pick up on is the kind of instinctive aspect or the visceral aspect of what used to be the opposition to gay relationships and gay sex. It wasn't based on any thought through, this is the harm that it does, because it's so difficult with consenting adults to think what harm there is being done. And I'd like to talk about a slightly similar example, which I think brings out this sort of visceral, even biological aspect quite a lot more clearly. And that is the issue of incest. And do you remember, Andrew, we went to Hyde Park and talk to the Muslims at Speaker's Corner.
Oh, I do, yeah.
It was like an outing from our London discussion group. And I was amazed. This talking point they had all the time was they wanted to talk about incest. And the reason is that we feel this massive sort of yuck factor and instantly feel repelled morally at the idea of incest. But when it's two older siblings, it isn't harmful because there's no chance of having a genetically damaged offspring from any sexual relations. So it's very hard to see where the actual harm is. And certainly if you have a kind of benefit and harm-based morality, you would say that as long as there's absolutely no chance of offspring, then there's no kind of power imbalance or anything like that, that siblings having sex is harmless and therefore morally neutral.
Can you put us in the context of why the Muslim particular groups were talking on that point, and what was their angle? And that would be of interest.
Yeah, well, their angle is almost opposite of what I'm taking from the same thing. Their angle was, we all know that incest is wrong, therefore your atheist benefit harm based morality is clearly giving you the wrong signal.
Right.
I mean, I think that when you say to people generally anything about incest and why is incest wrong, they will almost immediately come back with this response that, offspring of incestuous relationships have genetic problems. But then if you push back on that and say, well, okay, consider an example, like your example of older siblings, who are past, where one of them is female and past childbearing age, or where both of them are male, or where both of them are female, or where one or both of them has been sterilised. And you say, well, so we've removed that objection. Do you now feel it's all right? And invariably, people still don't feel it's all right. So there's something else going on.
Yes.
And what they are putting forward as their rational basis for objecting to it isn't their real basis.
Yes. So I'm saying the real basis is something visceral. And to me, I can see it's quite clearly where it comes from, that we are genetically programmed to be averse to incest because of the harm that it does with young adults having offspring. And so, but the biology it's only good enough. It doesn't need to be perfectly efficient. So just the overall sense of visceral kind of, oh, that's awful and horrible and that must be wrong, is enough to protect people. And there's no kind of genetic benefit for allowing sexual attraction for older couples.
I mean, what about this example? And you can tell me if this is too much of a diversion and you don't want to go into it because we didn't talk about it before the recording. What about sex with animals? Now, which is a crime. It's a crime to have sex with animals. But we already have criminal offences of causing unnecessary suffering to an animal. So provided you don't hurt the animal while having sex with it, and if you do hurt the animal, then you can be charged with causing unnecessary suffering to an animal, is it still immoral to have sex with an animal?
And so what you're getting at here, both of you, is that when people say yes, then there's something else going on deep within or outside of us. Is that where you're leading?
Yes, it seems to be.
Yeah.
It seems to be.
Yeah.
Or at least it's something that you perhaps need to accommodate within any theory of morality you have.
Yes. I would say there's a power imbalance, like there would be with having sex with a mentally not full capacity.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's always a power imbalance with an animal. I mean, anything you do with an animal is a power imbalance. I mean, if you get
Yes, if you
an
put it in a
ox
pen
to pull
so it
your
can't get out.
plough, that's it. Yes, that's right. I mean,
Eating meat, ultimately.
well,
It's like, well, we don't want to be killed. Yeah.
my children are both vegans, so they think almost anything, almost any human interaction with an animal is human exploitation.
Exactly.
Of the animal.
That was the kind of thing I was mentioning earlier. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Do you know there's a big irony, though, in this? The irony of ironies coming from the religious fundamentalist side is that, and again, this might tie into the Muslim thing, even against Christianity, but you've actually got, the fundamentalist reading the text that says, be fruitful and multiply, creates Adam and Eve, and you cannot get away from incest. Because, it's marrying your sisters. And then later on in the Bible, Abraham marries a sister. So you've actually got some interesting stuff, or half sister, going on even in how Christians will have this inner thing to say it's wrong, like in Leviticus, and then suddenly go and then sort of try to look the other way and go and ah when you read a natural reading of Genesis, like a literalist would. But that's probably later on when we talk about Bible stuff. Yeah. But that's when you mentioned incest, I immediately thought about Cain's wife, and
So what I'm trying to get from this, which I'm not sure if the diversion's helped or not, is that there is a connection between our biology and the evolutionary past with our visceral, instinctive reactions that seem to be the basis of our moral judgments, certainly in some cases, rather than more objective views of benefit and harm.
Would this also be, Ed and Francis, the same thing like I get when I'm when I realise that some cultures can eat a dog like we eat a chicken? And I'm horrified, like deep within, horrified. And where does that horrifiedness, for me anyway, come from about eating a dog? And yet someone can eat a dog like we eat a chicken. And is this the kind of area we're talking about? What is it that brings us something that's so strong that doesn't seem to come from us?
I think it is part of compassion and empathy. We have empathy for dogs in the way because of the society we live in, where dogs form part of our society. Yeah. And in fact, dogs have genetically been developed to fit in with human society and to be particularly close and communicative with humans. So because of that, we have a strong feeling of empathy to dogs that doesn't necessarily exist in other societies. Well, although dogs are basically the same, still they haven't, I suppose, forged those links that we have with them.
To man's best friend, as it were, as opposed to dinner.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
and yes, it feels like man's best meal. It feels like a morality, though. This is where we're going, isn't it? Basically, that feeling about dogs, I would want to extend to everybody. Or feeling that it should do, but it doesn't. It's like, oh my gosh, what brings it in me? Is it just my upbringing? Yeah, like you say, is it where I'm born? If I was born in China, I might have would probably have a very different view.
So moving on with another sort of observation we see from the field of morality, connected to biology again, is how similar we are to animals in our morality. Have you come across that wonderful video of a TED talk that you get when you Google TED talk and grapes and cucumbers?
Yes, I've seen it several times. Yeah,
I haven't seen the video, but I know about the experiment. I know what happens in the experiment.
Yes, it's quite funny, so it is worth watching.
Yeah, it's been done on lots of other animals as well. Yeah, it's absolutely. It's sometimes when you see it and you really see it, you start to think, oh my gosh, we laugh because it's so human-like, isn't it? It's like a kid with a tantrum saying, well, I want the lolly, not the lettuce,
That's no fair.
Yeah. Do you just want to outline it briefly then, Ed, that video, in essence?
Oh, okay. So Google TED and grapes and cucumbers. That should be enough to find it. And we'll put the actual link in the show notes. The experimenters knew that cucumbers are sort of okay, the monkey will take it. Grapes they love, and they use them as rewards. And the two monkeys are in a cage next to each other so they can see what is happening next door. and they are trained to do a little task. I think give a stone, and the monkey gives a stone. The researcher gives back a cucumber. Happy days. The monkey will be happy to do that apparently, and the monkey does it happily first time. Next, the neighbouring monkey does exactly the same thing, but is given a grape. And you could see the first monkey beginning to sort of hang on a minute, just sort of scratching his head, thinking, what's going on here? And it gets a bit more excited as well that next time it will get a grape. So they go back to the first cage, get the stone, but give back a cucumber. And this continues, and very, very quickly, the first monkey getting just a cucumber goes increasingly berserk over its unfair treatment.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's I just saw it again today in researching for this show episode, and it was just like, wow, it is something to actually see. Definitely it raises the question of so human-like. Why is that? That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So that just this feeling that we feel in ourselves when we're treated unfairly, you could see it so clearly in this near cousin of ours.
I'm a bit worried that some people might email us back and say they typed in grapes and cucumber, but it didn't take them to that video or website.
Oh, God. Oh, no.
I think with Ted, it should
So
be.
yeah, please put Ted in there. Anyway, moving on. That really will be the moral landscape, won't it?
Yeah.
It was.
Okay.
Now,
moving
apparently,
on.
this experiment's been repeated with other animals of the kind of social kind, with like dogs and chimps and even birds, with the same kind of result. And what's quite interesting was the researchers said they called it this sense of fairness a pillar of morality. And the other pillar of morality is empathy or compassion. And here's some notes for another video that you could Google, which is quite striking. Try the words monkey, train station, and video. And again, if you can't find it, there'll be the link in the show notes. Andrew, you have a go with it.
Yeah, it was a really, I mean, I hadn't seen this one before. I've seen the others quite a few times, but this one's where there's a monkey that gets electrocuted on a train track and is basically sort of out for the count, in sort of, out unconscious or whatever. And this other monkey comes along and shakes it and puts it in water and shakes it again and lifts it up and props it up, or props him up, her up, however. And it was, to me, again, it's that same thing. It seemed no different than a compassionate human with a human who'd got electrocuted on a track and was just trying to sort of revive it. I mean, it was reviving it in quite a strong, vigorous way, but actually it worked because the other monkey started to come round and sit up and started a bit of life coming back into he or she. And I was sitting there amazed, and all these people were filming it, and it was just like, yeah, it raises the question again that we so think this is us. And if anything cries out that there's common ancestry with, Homo sapiens, as we like to say, and various sort of monkeys or apes today, there's common ancestry there, and it wouldn't be surprising if the traits that are in us, and it raises huge questions like that, particularly for theists and things like that. So yeah.
So do we want to say anything sort of vaguely philosophical before we move on as to what the consequences are, as we think that social animals have very, very similar moralities as we do?
I think one of the things you might say is that it's very strange if, as theists claim, that morality is this completely separate thing that's all to do with human exceptionalism, that pretty much all morality you can see as arising from this instinct to look after your own community, to look after those who are around you. And I mean, is that supposed to be just a completely separate thing that developed with animals? And what is it about human morality that you would say is recognisably so different.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Are you saying that the observation of humans and animals is to care for your own is quite observable, and then moving out to people? Because funny enough, when I was researching a bit earlier on about this, when you'd mentioned something in the notes, I was struck by remembering many times over the years thinking, when there's a plane crash somewhere in the world and it goes, a plane crash, 240 people died, 2 of them were British, and it's like it's like almost as if it's okay, only 2 were British, and that's the kind of feeling I often got, and I think that's a hint at this thing that we start with our own family. We will do anything for the immediate blood. This is by nature. Then we'll do an extended thing for later, and then later further out, and eventually you might want to speak more on that, Ed, or bring that up. But it does seem that I've noticed that just by observing humanity, that it's your own blood that you care for. By default, you have to then go and almost do more. You have to almost discipline yourself to do more and go further than your own blood protection. But it seems to be an inbuilt thing.
Yes, it's a spectrum that goes all the way across the whole spectrum. So we will do much more for our own children than we will for our nieces and nephews, and we'll do much more for our nieces and nephews than for kind of the wider people in the family or clan. And then we'll be a bit more for our town than the whole of the country. And then our country is more important than the whole human race, and so it goes on.
Exactly.
So that's what I see as a tribal aspect of our morality.
Yes. Funny enough, when I was a kid, I remember my father saying that the world would only come together if we were attacked by aliens, because then we would all get together as one and say, they're the enemy, they're the difference, they're the ones that, and it's like, it's an interesting philosophical point if you want to get philosophical.
No, it is often a way of people binding together, that they identify an other.
Yes, you've got to have another
then
somewhere.
Everyone can turn on the other.
Yes.
And I think that accounts for a lot of anti-Semitism, that the Jews were a convenient other for everyone to, whatever their differences might have been in other ways, they could all gang up together in deciding that they didn't like the Jews, or that they were suspicious of the Jews. And I think it's I suppose it's a kind of scapegoat thing. And in Lord of the Flies, what brings a lot of the boys together is that they all gang up on Piggy. So they've got this thing in common where you're not Piggy, you're one of the not Piggy, you're part of that larger not Piggy tribe, and that helps to build cohesion. Even
when we try to kind of root out racism from our thinking, it's so in us due to our tribalism that we can kind of control it and manage it, but we can't just remove it.
No, that's right. I mean, everybody has stereotypes. Everybody tends to prefer people who are similar to them, including Black people, Asian people, Chinese people. You will always tend to relate to feel more comfortable and be more attracted towards someone who is some way like you, and it might not be a racial thing. It might be to do with your educational qualification. But, that person went to university. I went to university. Therefore, I feel, that person's young. And I mean, this can't be said of me anymore, but, if you were young, you would say, well, that person's young. I'm young. I'm more likely to say that person's old. I'm old. So it's... there is all this going on, this kind of attraction towards what we recognise as being similar characteristics to our own.
That's really interesting, Francis, because that reminds me, even in the Christian church, you had these tendencies against even the ideal theology of the church, because I went and joined a Baptist church in 1999. With the family, and I was coming from the outside. We all were. We were completely shocked, but internally it wasn't so much that. But basically, it really had evolved. This is absolutely serious. This is in my area in Southeast London. in 1999. Basically, most people on the right were white people, and most people on the left were black people. Okay, and it was an absolute shock to come into that church and realize that over years, people in their own sort of cultures had grouped together. And then I noticed on the church events in the week, you had the different events and social events, but nearly all of the same groupings would. So there was almost a segregation, but no one had set it up. It had just been a cultural thing. And we actually deliberately sat on one side to sort of make the difference. And over the years, other people sort of saw it and started to mix and change. But it had evolved that way. And people from the outside needed to tell them what they were seeing. And isn't that interesting? It's almost like we do naturally tribalize, and we have to sort of, again, discipline ourselves to step out of that something's pulling that tribe pulling, isn't it? And
researchers can produce it really easily. There was one experiment where people were invited to guess how many spots there were on an image, and people were then divided into overestimators of the number of spots, overestimators and underestimators.
Right.
And then they did some tasks and things, and they started exhibiting tribal behavior really quickly. So it's in all of us.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They started exhibiting what exactly? I didn't
exhibit tribal behavior.
Oh, right, because of
just by being put in an in-group and having an out-group.
So did they know the basis for the division? They knew that we are the overestimators, and that lot over there, they're the underestimators, or
yes,
did they
right.
not? Oh, they did, right? So okay. So of course, overestimation is the rational approach. And on the other side, they were saying, well, underestimation is the only sensible way to go.
Well, this is
it was more behaviour that was being observed, so that there would be in some kind of silly games and things that these experiments set up. They preferred people of their own tribe to the other tribe,
and no different in the church with like Calvinists and Arminians and all these groups. They tribalize, think that they're the ones that are best, and off you go into your segregated groups. Even within sort of Christian faith, I just see analogies all over the place sparking up now. But so there's something innate about tribalism, isn't it? It doesn't matter what subject or action.
But the point I'm trying to make is that morality is connected to our tribalism.
Yes,
they needn't be necessarily be connected, but they are connected. Because we feel a moral duty to our nephews and nieces that we don't feel to equivalent children in another culture on the other side of the world.
Yes, that's right. And all those stories and films and things that look at a plot where the rich relative dies and doesn't give the inheritance to the family and gives to some stranger is a story that's worth listening to, because it's not the way we act. Family thinks it's all about family. It's all about this inner tribe. And once you start expressing yourself outwards, you're sort of breaking the way we internally are or feel that it should be.
What I'd like to say in passing is people who criticize the theory of evolution as an explanation for morality will talk about our selfish gene, and how can that be any way a foundation of moral behavior. But I'd say it's much more like a gene pool. So if you've got a tribe that all look after each other and don't really care too much about other tribes, that tribe is going to, the gene pool of that tribe is going to survive much better than a tribe where basically it's a whole group of selfish gits who couldn't care about each other.
I think this is one of the things that is hugely misunderstood about the selfish gene. And I am particularly well qualified to talk about what Dawkins meant by the selfish gene on account of how I've never read his book, nor any of his other books. But my understanding is that it's a bit anthropomorphic, because the gene isn't consciously, obviously the gene can't be consciously thinking, I want this for myself, and I want to stop anybody else getting it. The way it works is that the genetics operates by a system whereby the system enables the genes to be reproduced. So it's not that there's any conscious selfishness going on. It is just a pattern of behavior which is embedded, which enables the genes to be propagated. And so it can be consistent with the selfish gene that an individual can demonstrate unselfish behavior, because that capacity to act unselfishly is what enables society as a whole to function, and therefore creates the best circumstances for that person who acted unselfishly for their own genes to continue, because that society will look after that person's children, because they have that kind of that sense of morality and that wish to be protective and caring. And so although the individual may end up sacrificing their lives because of their unselfishness, still the gene pool is advanced because of the context that it creates of a safe society.
You do share a lot more genes with your nephew. The actual same genes will be more in your nephew and you compared to someone further out in the sort of tribal structure.
Yes, which would explain why we instinctively find it easier to be unselfish towards those who are closest to us.
It has an affinity to the misunderstanding also in evolutionary terms, and very much overlapping with everything you said there, Francis, with the idea of survival of the fittest in evolution, which comes down stereotypically as might is right, stronger is best, push out the weak. When actually, survival of the fittest is actually much, much more nuanced. It's actually fit for your environment. And some mighty great things with big muscles and might aren't fit for an environment, and a different kind of creature would survive in a different environment as it's involved. And so it isn't, and it does tie into this thing that actually the more something else is happening, if something in a group survives in a community or a geographical location, that's what becomes fit. It's suited. So it's better to say suited for your environment rather than might is right, And that's the way I've read and heard the nuances of that sort of stereotypical thing, which you've both probably heard, I presume, so. Yeah.
Oh, yes. I mean, I think it was one of the ways in which the Nazis misunderstood and misrepresented Darwinism. Yes, that's right. That there's some, and also that there's some kind of value judgment about survival, that the fittest is the best and the superior one, and it's not. They're only the best in terms of they're best at staying alive and propagating, but they're not in any other way better than other species who may end up going to the wall. It's just a description of the way that that nature works in sifting out certain or in certain things dropping out of existence. But it doesn't mean that what is left is in any sense that we might recognize somehow superior.
Yeah, it's just adaptation. Adaptation is the key to environment. And so, there's an island with these turtles that move very slowly. They move like about, I don't know, they're at the zoo in London as well, and they move about, I don't know, it takes ages, about 15 minutes to walk a couple of meters or something. And evidently they evolved because they had nothing to really chase them, and their heads don't even go back in their shells because they evolved, but they're weird. It looks like, why can't you go in or out properly? Because they just didn't evolve that way to need to protect themselves. And so they're very slow and very strange, but they seem to be quite happy from my perspective, anyway, digress.
But humans are warlike. We've got that in us as well. So it isn't just all altruism.
No, there's that side as well. But then the ape community is like that as well. They're tribal, fighting each other, killing each other. Different ones, so that's the same as us, though, as well. So
and but our warlikeness is also along tribal lines, so we can just see the same thing going on. I like to imagine it as kind of two tribes in the jungle, and one are completely selfish to each other and to everybody. And when the environmental crisis comes, they start starving and they don't cooperate properly, and the whole lot get wiped out because they can't cooperate. Another lot are kind of complete dudes and are really altruistic and all love each other and very non-violent to anybody. They survive, but then when a warlike tribe comes along, they don't defend themselves.
Oh, are you thinking of bonobos?
Bonobos.
Because bonobos,
like that.
Yeah, somebody once said that bonobos are like the sort of peace-loving hippies of the 1960s, and that they kind of, instead of go to war, they send a female out to a new bonobo male that comes across the tribe. They'll send a female out to have sex with them, to bring them in. Whoa, that is a very different operation to other tribes where they just kill each other and they'd kill the other one coming in. So isn't that interesting, though, that our ancestry, if you like, has these two factors, that sort of peace-loving one and the warfare-killing one?
Yes, and we're like the chimps, so the warfare.
Yeah, we're much more like the chimp ones that they've argued. And I've heard recent studies to say, why didn't we get more of the bonobo approach? Because they do seem to be pretty consistent like that.
But if you can imagine, if there's a society where people are very altruistic with each other and able to sort of lay down their lives for the sake of the village in conflict, then that will be the kind of tribe that will survive the longest, because they'll both see off other warriors or take over other bits of the jungle. Yeah. So that's what we see. We're this mixture of altruism and warlike kind of conflict.
It's amazing how religious people, particularly I'd say the more conservative fundamentalists, whether it's Muslim or Christian, really want to steer away from all of this and want to look the other way, because these animals are meant to be just some kind of such a separate thing going on, that humans are ordained with a soul from God, and they've got the moral duty and all to do with God on them, and animals are just this thing. They might as well just be a chair or something, because they've got no. But when we look at all that we've been talking about today, that it's so strikingly, to me, stares you right in the face that there's some connection with all of us.
Yes.
And
yes, I think it's very difficult to maintain human exceptionalism in the face of evidence like that.
Yeah.
Now, Andrew, as our Bible expert, when you see morality, particularly in the Old Testament, do you think it fits this sort of tribal way, or of a sort of universal morality that's equal to everybody?
Well, this is you could do a whole almost year of podcasts on this, really. But I think that, certainly in my journey, you obviously inherit from your mother's milk, as they say, this sort of idea of a universal morality. It all comes from God, and you're anybody outside of that is just like ignoring the obvious. Where actually, I think, anyway, my journey of looking at the Bible, particularly through the Old Testament, it made so much more sense eventually when I could see it as so much of a human book and a human evolving. Even using the term evolution for the Bible is a valid one. It's an evolving series of texts and stories and narratives, and there's scenes and stories in there that we just find so today. Even Christians look back and go, "Oh my gosh, that sounds so wrong," and yet, if you see it as man-made and evolving morality, even of their projection of God as a warfare God and fighting just like every other nations, and then we get a different sort of reflection later and start to look at it in a different way, and then again, as time moves on, I think that tribalism is all over the Old Testament particularly. And even if you think about the New Testament with the born-again Christians, so, Christians are on the good side and the bad people are on the dark side. You've made two massive tribes right there. And I see tribalism all over and morality in the Bible.
Well, certainly there's a lot of tribalism, because Yahweh was an Israelite tribal deity.
Exactly.
And it was because he favoured them they believed that he favoured them, that they were so adamant about worshipping only Yahweh. Because originally, and I know we've dealt with this before, originally it wasn't that there were no other gods. It was that Yahweh was their God, and he particularly looked after them. And that was why he was a jealous God, because there were other gods to be jealous of.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to make sure that Yahweh carried on looking after you and looking after Israel, you had to make sure that you didn't go sneaking off with other gods.
Yeah. There's a great book that Seth Andrews on the Atheist podcast actually did the audio for, and it's I forget the author, but it's called The Alpha God, and it looks through the Old Testament and sort of Christianity and the nature of God as he's portrayed, very much like an alpha male of even the ape communities has been observed in studies. And it's like, oh gosh, when you read it in that light and you see it all to do with land as well, of course it's ironic, isn't it, that the Old Testament isn't about sort of going to heaven and salvation. It's actually more about a land grab. This land is yours, that's not theirs. There's this territory, kill those that are in that territory. Don't kill this in this territory.
Yes.
The Canaanites have got to be completely gone. And it's when you read it through that light, it is tribalism with very much a male patriarchal kind of character leading them,
Yes, that's right. The people who were in the immediately surrounding territories were just absolutely persona non grata, whereas those who were a bit further away, who were on the other side of those territories and therefore less of a threat, you could actually be slightly nice to them. You didn't have to go in and kill every single one of them. You could offer them
make them slaves.
Terms.
That's right.
Yes, that's right. You can make them slaves.
Exactly. Or whatever.
And we all know what a good deal it was to be a slave, and how much everybody loved it.
There's a story actually in the Old Testament where they tricked them and they did something to make them seem like they weren't. I forget what the scene was or something, but basically they tricked the leaders of Israel, but they had to hold to their promise that they wouldn't kill them like they were killing everyone else. But in the end, they were sort of like, oh, no, we can't go back on our word. I know, we'll make them slaves. And so there's some sort of honouring going on there of some sort of contract, but it's a fascinating. But again, Ed, as the initial question is, what's the morality in the Bible? Right there. People today, Christians today, are going to look back and say, it's really difficult to see this as all wonderful stuff, from an absolute God with not a single change of morality going on. This is where the nub hits with faith believers,
Yeah.
And,
it's interesting. We have moved on from there. We could say, okay, the Old Testament is steeped in the tribal morality.
Yes, that's right.
Sort of inherent in us, but somehow we've broken free from it. So, for example, in modern times, we've changed or the British culture has changed from colonialism to more, Band-Aid is a sort of, that was something in popular culture. It's not the high and mighty trying to sort of tell people what to do and collect money for Oxfam. This was, it sort of almost came from below, and people naturally wanted to help. In that case, it was the famine in Ethiopia in the 1980s. Yes. And they were seen as us, that we need to help, not as sort of, don't care about you, you're the wrong tribe. And the Bible, of course, also went on its own journey from that tribal thing in the Old Testament to the teaching of Jesus, which is much more, caring for foreigners.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was even all of that teaching in the Old Testament, surprisingly enough, about caring for foreigners and the orphans and the widows and all that. And there's a very strong strand in there, but it's sort of mixed with this other strand, and so you it's almost as if there's almost competing or different emphasis from different writers, but it's so different.
All societies at the time in the ancient Near East, all of them praised those who would care for the foreigner and the weak. It wasn't that it was a particularly Old Testament thing. Every society regarded it as highly virtuous to look after the weak, not to oppress slaves. You could have slaves, but you shouldn't oppress them, and you should look after the foreigner. They all recognised that vulnerability, but there was also at the same time the possibility that these people might, in a different context, be enemies, and then you just went in hard. I mean, I think you could see that it wasn't that different from society now, where we have, we have compassion, but we can also be quite belligerent. That's humans haven't changed that much, and there's still those two sides to human nature. the sort of caring side and the side that says, we need to look after our own interests here, and so to do that, we need to, do down the other side.
You can see it all in the Bible, because we've said this before, but of course it relates right back to what you said, Ed. Well, both of you actually, like we've already covered in the slavery one, there were laws catering for the well-being of your Israelites family, but actually not so much the Canaanite, and the foreign nations. And so we were first port of call, Israelites, so that's back to the evolutionary psychology we've been talking about. If it's come from tribalism and evolution, no wonder it's going to turn up in the Bible without them even realizing it, because it's human behavior, It's not God. It's not so-called Christ-like God behavior as later developed. It seems to me. So,
okay, I'm keen to rattle on.
Yep.
Another whole area is the way that morality seems to be socially conditioned. So there's a big social element to what we feel is right and wrong. So, for example, in a patriarchal society, someone breaking out of the patriarchy was considered to be acting shamefully and immorally. So even, for example, with the suffragettes and the suffragists, who were the non-violent ones, there were groups of women who came together to fight against that reform movement. So they were wanting to stay in the patriarchal system, because that was the social conditioning they had. So they were, even against their own interests, were gathering to keep the status quo going.
Well, I couldn't recommend more than watching the show on Netflix called Unorthodox.
I've seen that. It's I love that, and I've read the book as well.
It's amazing, because that's about breaking out of the male patriarchal, extreme fundamentalist Jewish culture. And wow, does it really put it in its place in terms of visually, doesn't it? The concepts.
Yeah.
I thought it was brilliant.
Unorthodox. Yeah, amazing. 4-parter only, so it's worth watching. But just again, these visual things make the point way more than us talking about something like that.
So another example is in tiny remote communities, like in the jungle or something, little tribes, the idea of violence is just not there at all. They just never have a murder because it's so socially unacceptable. It just wouldn't occur to them. Whereas in other societies, the idea of vengeance and feuds between families is completely socially acceptable, and you have a kind of moral duty to do a revenge killing. So how you behave morally comes from your social setting. It's not necessary from biology, such as we've been talking about quite a lot so far.
Well, we mentioned that at the beginning about eating certain animals over here like dogs, and not in other countries when they do. That's the social setting, I think you were saying more, wasn't it, Francis? A similar thing.
Yes, somewhat. Yes.
And moving to the kind of religious side, do you think the cultures and social settings where there is a sort of strong, particularly a monotheist religion, generates better, healthy moral norms compared to other societies?
Sorry, can you rephrase that?
Well, where do you think religion comes in? Do you think, like with monotheistic societies, with the one God setting morality, has that produced better cultures and social settings for good morals?
I suppose so. Some people would say aspects of it have, and then other aspects of it have been very damaging with a dual path, But Francis, what are you going to say?
I was going to say that I think I was going to say pretty much what you're saying, that it doesn't necessarily, but it can do. But I mean, you see some pretty terrible things going on in societies, I don't think it's so much the God you believe in, it's the number of beliefs you have. And having one God doesn't prevent there from being a large number of conflicting beliefs. So if you look at medieval times and the times when the Protestant Reformation was starting off, the abhorrent cruelty that was shown on each side by Catholics to Protestants and Protestants to Catholics.
In the 30 Years' War as well, particularly,
I mean, I don't know if you've ever read the account of the burning of, was it Latimer and somebody else?
Ridley.
But Ridley. It just makes you feel sick to read about how long, I think it was Latimer who took so long to burn, and he was standing on the faggots saying, for God's sake, let the flames come to me. I cannot burn. And he was in agony before finally he caught light. And I mean, just the idea that somebody could do that and think that they were doing
under religious terms and good. Well, yeah,
that's right.
I mean, some people would argue that this is the danger of extreme religious thought, because when you've got a Bible or a holy book that has similar things about what God's going to do to you, you tend to imbibe that archetypal figure, and therefore you probably sear your own conscience in some way, all under morality of God, and say God will put you to hell in the flames. We'll talk about that next time in the subject we do, and you. It's really weird, isn't it, to think that today there's a sort of a pullback even in Christian circles against that, and yet the spirit of the age people argue about in previous Christian times was so horrific. It didn't seem to clash with high vocal voices anyway against the way you burnt heretics. It was more important to have truth and burn heretics. They drowned Anabaptists. So when I was at Bible College and I found out that, the Protestants, Catholics were having their go, but they both were against the Anabaptists who taught adult baptism, which won out in evangelicalism, but they drowned them and said, if you want to go in the water, we'll put you in.
Yeah.
And hold them down.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is Christian people with a God, supposedly, that they believe in, a relationship, because you and the irony is, when you become an evangelical Protestant, you actually believe in the adult baptism. And so it's like, wow. Anyway, yes, cruelty
so
can come from
another kind of connecting aspect to this is when we see how socially conditioned our morals are, is also to note the more obvious point, which is that our morals are changing all the time.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't know. Perhaps that's something that we can talk about in a future program, because my view on this is that fundamentally our morals don't necessarily change that much. But I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to go into this now, subject to time constraints, or we can deal with it in one of the subsequent programs.
Yeah.
Well, we can just note that our morals have changed.
Certainly what we believe is moral or immoral has changed.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know necessarily that it's quite the same thing, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think domestic violence is an interesting one.
Yeah.
Yes. That's certainly something that has been only relatively recently recognised as being serious, because when I started in practice, it was just quite common for people to say, well, it's just a domestic. And generally, police wouldn't prosecute domestic violence cases for a number of reasons. One of which was that the woman would it was almost invariably a woman. I mean, virtually never a man. And the woman would 9 times out of 10, possibly more, withdraw. So what they used to leave the woman to do, this is the police, she would go along to the magistrate's court, get a summons against her partner for some kind of assault. And then it was all down to her, she had nobody helping her. And so generally in a couple of weeks she'd be back with withdrawing. And she was this was regarded by the magistrates as being sort of an abject failure on the part of the woman. There was no understanding of the sort of social pressures that might lead a woman to, and not to say, not even just social pressures, just pressures from her partner who had the key to her front door. So the woman was sort of regarded as a nuisance. And there were sometimes magistrates tried to order costs against her for dropping the case, which was legally an untenable order. But anyway, and it's now much better understood that domestic violence is really serious, that it's a cause of numerous deaths amongst women. It's one of the leading causes of deaths amongst women, and that women drop cases not because they are frivolous or because nothing really happened, but because they are under immense pressure from various sources to not to go ahead with the case. I mean, I think that may to some extent highlight what my attitude is towards changing morality, that it's not so much that morality changes as that we come to know more about the circumstances. So we see the facts surrounding the situation as different, and therefore attracting a different moral assessment.
Yeah.
Isn't it only in recent years, in line with this, Frances, that rape in marriage was actually recognised?
Oh, yes, that's right.
Now, that's a big telling thing right there, isn't it? Because
absolutely. It was... there was a case on it, and actually I'm just trying to remember whether the case... No, ultimately the case did go against the prosecution. So in other words, no, it went in favour of the defendant. That's right. So they had to change. In the end, they did change the law. But for years, it was
obviously many years. Yeah.
Yes, if you've married somebody, then you have implicitly consented to any sexual intercourse. I mean, there were certain... I don't want to get too graphic, but there were... No. It had to be... The intercourse had to be sort of the procreative type. So it had to be sort of fairly standard sexual intercourse. Right. Nothing too exotic. Anything exotic, a woman was not deemed to have consented to. But
so conjugal rights, as they say.
It was conjugal rights, yes. Conjugal rights you had consented to. And, that your husband could not possibly be guilty of raping you because you had consented forever in all circumstances for the whole length of the marriage.
Can you see that's the damage of some religious kind of teaching as well, if you think about it? Because if you did that outside of marriage, you're then all condemned for being immoral and you're doing the wrong things and you're abusing the woman and you're not doing everything right. And then you get married under God, and then you have this abusive potential set up that people turn a blind eye to until this century or last century. Anyway, really interesting coming from that side.
So as we kind of wrap up the look of the morality as it actually is out in the field with people, we could have a quick look at some of the more famous experiments that have been done in particularly psychology labs and things in this area. Yeah. So, Frances, is there any that you would like to pick up on?
Well, it's not exactly a lab experiment, but there's the thought experiment of the trolley trolleyology.
I would call that a lab experiment.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, definitely.
No, there wasn't.
I've got a story about that as well.
How can it be a lab? How can it be a lab experiment?
Well, in that you ask people.
I see what you mean.
Results.
Frances, you're a literalist. What are you, fundamentalist? It's a lab experiment, metaphorically.
Well, you see, I'd see this as a primarily a thought experiment.
Oh, yeah, well, okay.
Okay. So the thought, the idea is that if you are standing on a bridge and you can see a trolley bus coming down the tracks, and the tracks split in two, and you see that the trolley bus is if it's left as it is, it will go down a line where there are some men working, and they are obviously unaware of it, and it will kill 5 of these people who are working on the line. And this is a sort of controlling bridge. It's a signal type bridge, and you've got levers and controls. All you can do, there's nothing you can do to stop the trolley as such, but one thing you can do is switch the lines so that instead of going towards the 5 people that it's headed for, it will branch off and hit and go down another line, but there's one person on that line. So it will only kill one person. And the question is, what is the right thing to do? Should you do nothing and when 5 people will be killed? Or should you intervene and kind of take the responsibility by proactively changing the way that the trolley is going, effectively killing one person? You know, what's the right thing to do? And I think that people tend to be quite divided on it in that form. But there are other.
I thought that most people are quite keen to, when you set it up that way, to let the trolley to actively divert the trolley to the one person.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the numbers would be on that. I think
something like 80% or something like that.
Okay. Well, okay. You tend to get a different result, though, if you have different permutations. So one permutation is that instead of being on a separate line, the one person being on a separate line, the one person is in a valley, in their back garden, sleeping in their hammock. But you can get the trolley to sort of go off the rails, and they would career down into the garden, and they'll kill the person sleeping in their hammock. People are less willing, when they're given that scenario, to say that they would change the route of the trolley. But perhaps one of the most interesting in terms of it produces a different result, permutations, is the permutation where you are standing on just an ordinary bridge. You have no control over the lines. You can see that the trolley is zooming along the track to hit these 5 people working on the line. And it could be stopped if you can put something very heavy and bulky in its path. And standing next to you is a very fat person. You are not a fat person, and by leaping in front of the trolley yourself, you would not make any significant difference. But if you tip the fat person over and they landed on the line, then they would halt the trolley enough for the other 5 people to get out of the way. And I think almost nobody is prepared to sacrifice one person in those circumstances. I mean, that is a permutation too far. Nobody will pick up the fat person next to them to chuck them onto the line.
This could not be more better demonstrated in, I'm going to have to TV show plug again, The Good Place. Another great show. It looks at philosophy all over the place. The dialogue is amazing. They do this visually fantastically in season 2. Yeah, they throw in all kinds of extra things. Like, for example, it's all rapidly fast. He has to make a quick decision, and it's so difficult. And you see the stress, but they redo it because they can do that in The Good Place. And what they do is that he goes, well, okay, we're going to knock the 5 over. And then he says, no, I'll do the single person. And then suddenly the single person turns into his best friend. So that then brings up another moral thing. Oh, flip! Now it's the single person he's going to actually kill to save the 5.
Yes, that's right. Your best friend, or your child, or your child.
That's right. Or he goes into the moral background of the 5 people as they're going along. He goes, well, he's a serial killer. He was a thing, and you have less value for them. Oh, well, we'll kill them then. You know. So it's so well done. I don't think it could be presented any better. I had only heard of this moral dilemma, but when I saw it visualized, I thought, gosh, how could you make decisions? How can you do it? You know, the way they present it just throws everything up, you know. So put that in. Good Place, Netflix. A lot of people listening to this would have probably heard.
And to me, what was really striking is Francis's example of the fat man being pushed over onto the track.
Yeah.
Because philosophically, it's identical to just switching a lever. But when you actually have to get close up and fleshy and push somebody, somehow the pure kind of morals change, and it's all about your right back to where we started, the sort of yucky feelings of
they did
your
that
kind
in
of
the show
visceral
as well.
moral compass.
They showed the reality of doing it. It was very different to being in an ivory tower talking about it, and that's what it did. They brought him down out of his philosophy, as it were, and just put him in the situation. And it was like, wow, that, like you said, Ed, it would be so different what you would do in reality, even to a theory, Have
we quickly got time to just throw in a bit of Milgram experiment, and then we're done?
That's the experiment which is said to prove that how easily people can be led to do wrong things.
Oh, yes.
Where people were told that they were to take part in an experiment, and the experiment was that the subject of the experiment had to learn certain things. And so these people thought that they were carrying out work on the subject of the experiment. What they didn't realize was that they were the subjects of the experiment. So they were told, this person, we're trying to find out how people learn things. This person has to sort of carry out certain tasks. If they don't do the task correctly, give them an electric shock and carry on giving them an electric shock at increasing voltages, we'll sort of that's how our experiment is going to be carried out. And the reported result was that most people, even when the victim, in air quotes, because this person was an actor, the person in the other room was just an actor, even when the victim was screaming and saying, "Oh my God, I can't take this, please stop, I've got a weak heart, please," they would still just carry on delivering higher and higher shocks. And so it was supposed to show that when people are put into a situation where they're told by people in authority that they must carry out certain orders, then they do it. And that was supposed to explain how Nazism arose. There's recently, I think there was always a question mark about it. I mean, I can remember hearing about this experiment in the 70s when I was reading philosophy, and my tutor saying, actually, I don't think this is a very reliable experiment. He said, I'm not somebody who's in a room with another authority figure, and the authority figure isn't saying, do this, it doesn't matter that the person is in pain. They're just saying, this is fine, don't worry about it, this is fine, go on, and being completely calm. So they felt, anyway, it seems that a lot of the people realised that there was more going on and that they weren't completely taken in by the actors in the experiment, and so they didn't really believe that they were administering potentially lethal shocks to some poor person on the other side of a window. But anyway, that is still sometimes cited as evidence of how quickly and how easily humans can turn to
isn't it
oppressive
argued
cruelty
that in Germany that the people sort of experimenting and doing stuff on Jews and other people over there, that they were all sort of swept under this kind of thing. And some people have argued that, haven't they? That they were just following orders and just doing these atrocities and almost needed to snap out of it. I don't know if you've heard anything about that kind of talk.
That was in the mind of the researcher, Milgram himself, when he set up the experiment.
Right. So, right. I mean, it's a bit suspicious that the experiment proved what he expeced it to.
Right.
But,
that you can just follow,
orders.
As
As to what happened in Nazi Germany, I don't know, maybe that's beyond our the remit of this program. I think people can be desensitized to human suffering and desensitized to the notion that another person is a human being like them. But that's such a massive subject. I don't know. I don't think we could do it justice in the time we've got left.
You're right. Yeah.
Well,
indeed.
Yeah, well, that's our little survey of the field of morality as it actually is observed in human societies.
Yeah, it's a launch pad of a subject, isn't it, to get into something massive, really, for anyone who wants to think about these things relating to faith and theism as well. I've been stimulated quite a lot just by this conversation. There's a lot to think about as well. Yeah, on that. Yeah. So, what have we got next then, Ed?
Well, we're hoping that we can kind of mull it over in a more gentle way, back to more of the philosophical side of it, with a guest. But we don't want to say too much because of we might get turned down in our request.
That's right, and if that is the case, we will have a. I hate to use the pun here, but we'll have a red hot topic coming. And I tell you what, if we don't do this show sometime, I'll be damned. Right, yeah, we're going to do a show, probably more led by me, on hell and the various views in the Christian world throughout history on hell and how it's developed through history and what people think about it today in within Christianity. And I look very much forward to doing that and have you two contribute in the ways that you wonderfully do on that. So that will either be next month or it will be the one afterwards.
Okay. Is that Christmas special? Hell could be our Christmas special.
Hell could be, yeah. Well, Christmas is hell for a lot of people. So, so there you go. So we've not done this before on this podcast in terms of, apart from mentioning it here and there, but we haven't dedicated a whole podcast to hell. It sounds funny, doesn't it? But it's not a funny subject actually when it gets down to it, but at all. But anyway, so that's where we're headed.
We can sign off. Do give us feedback. doubtsaloud@gmail.com, and we'll be back next month.
Anyway, until next time, I've been your host, Andrew.
I've been Francis.
And I've been Ed. Bye.